Oh, hello, it's Kristen Forster here. This is Crumbs Under the Table, blogs with my dogs, which I think, there they are. I'm continuing where I left off kind of yesterday. We've been looking at various characters who stand behind the Bible, the writers and the characters that play within it. And just looking and thinking about how their lives demonstrate the way the Lord uses people's natural instincts and their skills and their gifts, and He commissions them within something that makes sense for them, and then kind of gifts them around that with the opportunities to make the most of those skills. And as you've picked up as I've kind of probably done these things, I take the view that that's not just unique to those characters we're looking at. You just see it nicely comes out with what we're able to know about them. But actually, it's part of the kind of environment of care and love that the Lord has for us. The way He calls us and prepares things for us to do, gives us things that are engaging in life. I keep saying, well, I've been putting off kind of doing Peter. Because there's a huge amount that can be said about Peter, because there's a lot we get in the Bible, obviously, about both his social context, his work life, his mission kind of context, and then there's a huge amount we actually get in terms of reliable church tradition, not kind of the fantasy church tradition. I mean, there's some fantasy as well. There's a little incident in Rome where he's kind of flying in the air, having an aerial fight with, but those are more the kind of legendary elements, which I'm not going to touch on. And so there is an awful lot we can say. Now, and yesterday when we looked at Matthew, when I finished, I discovered I'd spent half an hour on a blog that when I first started, I thought these would be 5 or 6 minutes. In practice, I reckon they're just under a quarter of an hour. So this one was more than twice what I would normally do. So this morning, what I'm going to do when we think about Peter is I'm going to keep myself very tight. So I'm just going to look at one element, because there are actually multiple elements we could look at in terms of both the call and the mission of Peter, and the kind of things we've been looking at, the way he uses his skill. And I wanted to kind of focus in on Simon the Fisherman, the man he is before he becomes Peter the Rock, the church leader and missionary and so on. My dogs are beginning to kind of get a little bit. They're crowding out. See, look, they're coming in close. They always kind of like get concerned when we sit around here. They like to kind of walk much more than sit, don't you, dogs? Okay. So let's just focus and think, because we often we see Peter as a fisherman, and there's an incident in the book of Acts, where he's called before the council Sanhedrin, and it says, and they saw seeing as they weren't educated men. But that doesn't mean Peter can't read or write. Actually, it just means it's the kind of context of the Sanhedrin is made up of kind of those who've gone to the equivalent of public school. They've had the best education money can buy, and so they would expect to win an argument with what is a man who effectively runs a small business. So Peter's not incompetent. He's a competent man. So as a fisherman, He owns multiple boats, and what's fascinating is that of course his home has been excavated. I remember reading a kind of review over 20 years of research that's been done there in an episode of Biblical Archaeology. They have a free they used to do a free new e-sheet. I used to get that, and it tells some of the story and some of the finds and so on at the house, Biblical archaeology basically said is about as clear as they will ever be. This really is Peter's house. It didn't actually say that, because as they kind of pointed out, but they were kind of putting it in terms of as sure as you ever can be within archaeology. Everything says this is the house of Peter, because we know that it's been used as a church since the 1st century. So within the 1st century, the century that Jesus lives in, he dies in 33 AD, dies and resurrected. And within, therefore, that 70 years, we find the house is being used. It's actually a complex of houses, which actually fits what we read in Scripture, because Jesus and his family stay there. Andrew seems to live in the house. Peter has a wife and his mother-in-law living there, because actually he lives within his business. So his business, therefore, seems to be have multiple boats. It'll have multiple employees. It then brings and cleans the fish, ready to take them to places where they process them. It seems that round the coast, I can't remember what the town is now, but when excavations have actually shown that there's a kind of major fish smoking business just around the coast of Galilee a little bit. So that may be not part of what Peter is doing, but they are preparing the fish and so on. And so the house was big enough for multiple people to live in it in the Gospels. Peter is self-sufficient enough that he's taken time off to be down in the mission with John the Baptist, which is where he first meets Jesus. All of the disciples meet Jesus there, according to the book of Acts, and we just don't read about all of them. So when Jesus calls them in Galilee, it's not the first time he's met them. It's one of the misconceptions I had growing up at, the way it was taught at Sunday school. It's kind of like, first time they ever meet Jesus, they follow him. It's not the case. They've got to know Jesus in the context of John the Baptist ministry. Then, so in the book of Acts, when they appoint Matithia to replace Judas, it says that they're looking for someone who's been with them, plural, i.e. the apostles, from the beginning, from the time of John the Baptist. So while they may not have been a team at that point, they've got some history with Jesus that goes right the way back to that period. And so Peter's been able to go down there and spend time there, which is perhaps where he's first met Jesus. Jesus has stayed with him. And so on up in Capernaum, and so in that context, then Jesus calls Simon. Let's kind of remember he's Simon at this point. He's not yet become Peter. When Jesus first met Simon down under John the Baptist, he did say to him, "You will be called Peter." And later he does talk about that. Now you are Peter, and that's one of the other things which I said if we talk about that will take far too long this morning. Something I've kind of covered in my books and other places, so you can try and find those. But I just wanted to focus on this element of Simon. Simon is the most common name, male name in Jesus' day. I think Yeshua is actually the fifth most common name. Johanan John comes in at about number 3. No, is it 2? And strangely, actually, I think it's Lazarus, which is also Eleazar stroke Lazarus, is actually also one of the most common names. It's just kind of one of those interesting little things, these folks that we meet. But anyway, so his parents have called him Simon, which means to listen, which is a wonderful kind of name because people always were understood in Jesus' day the names that they were giving their children. So they've got hopes. At one level, it's listening to the Lord, but perhaps they just hoped he would listen to them as parents, which is kind of was perhaps a misplaced hope, seeing as Peter never seems to listen. I often make the comment in the joke that he's the only person in Scripture who's interrupted by all 3 members of the Trinity. It's now raining on me, so I'm going to make this quick. So let's go back to that point. So Jesus calls Simon. It's a supernatural catch of fish. Simon already knows Jesus. He's seen miracles down in Jerusalem. And in that context, Jesus says, "Now follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." And it's interesting that he appeals using something that Peter understands. I mean, in the end, what Peter is going to do looks nothing like kind of the fishing industry. Now, I'm going to have to be careful here and try and keep my phone dry. So I'm just working out how to do this. This may be one of my quickest talks yet. I'm going to start walking back in this rain, and I'm